Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Red Book podcast, the Tolkien podcast that isn't obsessed with TV shows or movie trilogies. This is a podcast dedicated to the works of j.r.r. Tolkien, and in the last episode I explored the divisive figure Fëanor, his relationship with his family, the old and the new, the controversy surrounding his father Finwë remarrying, and how Fëanor's unique upbringing perhaps played a part in the figure he would later become. A reminder that you can find this podcast on various platforms under the name The Red Book: Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Amazon, Audible. All episodes can be viewed on my YouTube channel as well, The Red Book, with dozens of other videos exploring the works of Tolkien. I appreciate any support, be it a comment, a question, subscribing to YouTube, or becoming a member on Patreon. Thanks to everyone who has supported this project so far. In this episode I'm going to discuss wizards, elves and hobbits, the naivety of hobbits surrounded by a much larger and less simple world of immortals and magical beings.
They are sailing over the sea. They're going to the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. But Ted laughed.
Well, that isn't anything new if you believe the old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail. But I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire.
The relationship between Gandalf and hobbits goes back further than the adventures shared by Gandalf and Bilbo in The Hobbit. Gandalf seems to have been interested in the Shire for a long time, befriending members of the Took family, said to be responsible for quiet lads and lassies going off into the blue for mad adventures. The old Took, Bilbo's grandfather, was a friend of Gandalf's, and so was Bilbo's uncle, Isengard Took, said to have been inspired by Gandalf to journey outside of the Shire and to the sea of all places, that in turn inspiring Bilbo to ask the wizard for tales about who had journeyed beyond the safe borders of his own land. But did any of these hobbits ever stop to think of what a wizard was? Did Bilbo notice how well preserved Gandalf was after decades? How did the innocent and unsophisticated hobbits view wizards or even the immortal elves? The Lord of the Rings does lead us to an answer, and shows us the growth in not only knowledge but wisdom among those hobbits who journeyed beyond the Shire and into the matters of kings and dark lords. Hobbits who view wizards with a keener perception as the War of the Ring unfolds and eventually draws to a close. Hobbits in general may not have the greatest of imaginations, but this is coupled with a sense of courage. They are the representation of a simpler life, a rustic life. How they view people beyond their borders speaks of their innocence and naivety when it comes to not only how large Middle-earth is, but of what goes on in Middle-earth. To hobbits, wizards are wizards. What does that mean? It means they are capable of magic, of course. But what's magic? Hobbits don't think of Lords of the West, the Blessed Realm, divine beings with plans that take millennia to complete. They are naive to the concept. Hobbits even seem to generally dismiss the elves passing west as old tales, as Ted Sandeman demonstrates in the second chapter, The Shadow of the Past. I opened this episode with his thoughts about that, but here is what Sam said in the first place about the elves.
And I've heard tell that elves are moving west. They do say they're going to the harbours, out away beyond the White Towers. Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old towers, beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition that away over there stood the Grey Havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return.
Let me remind you that this is a discussion about elves, not of the Maiar or the Valar. Elves who have dwelt in Middle-earth from before the awakening of the race of men, and in turn the hobbits. Their presence is there for all to see, even in this time when many have left the shores of Middle-earth. The elves know of hobbits, but elves seem to still be mysterious and spoken of in whispers, like myth or legend. Sam is talking about them sailing over the sea, going west, while waving his arm in the general direction of the White Towers. These were towers found in the Tower Hills to the west. The westernmost tower is called Elostirion, and a palantir pointing towards Valinor is located there, an area of what we would call magic and wonder located not so far from the Shire. It would take a hobbit less time to walk from Minas Tirith in Gondor to the Black Gate of Mordor than it would to leave their borders and make a much safer trip to the Grey Havens, to directly speak with elves who we would assume would welcome them. It's not quite an afternoon stroll, but it's not the other side of the world, yet to common hobbits it may as well be a million miles away. Ted is right in his ignorance. None of them were seeing the elves make this journey, and few seemed to be bothered by it. The elves seen as almost legendary in the Shire, despite at the time of the Lord of the Rings being able to see them pass, as Sam was saying. Of course, I'm not saying hobbits imagined elves as people here would imagine fairies or leprechauns, but they were so ignorant of their existence that the concept of them passing west was far off. It was fairy tale-like. Why would all this talk of elves matter when it comes to Gandalf the Wizard? Well, think about it. If the concept of elves passing to some strange land over the Great Sea was foreign to hobbits, how could they possibly grasp wizards? The Maiar, the Valar, Valinor itself. They could take a trip to the Havens and learn from one of the wise directly, asking questions, broadening their horizons. But no. Hobbits lacked the experience and imagination to consider what Gandalf truly was. Even the nature of the Istari, or wizards, was unknown to most of the elves. With the history of that race passing through centuries and millennia, many of them dwelling in Middle-earth for ages, not all of them knew or understood exactly what Gandalf, Saruman and the other wizards were as they wandered and dwelt in Middle-earth. Even as the first shadows were felt in Mirkwood, there appeared in the west of Middle-earth the Istari, whom men called the Wizards. None knew at that time whence they were, save Círdan of the Havens, and only to Elrond and to Galadriel did he reveal that they came over the sea. But afterwards it is said among the elves that they were messengers sent by the Lords of the West to contest the power of Sauron, if he should rise again, and to move elves and men and all living things of goodwill to valiant deeds. The Silmarillion, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. We are also told in Unfinished Tales that the Istari belonged to the Third Age and then departed. None save maybe Elrond, Círdan and Galadriel discovered of what kind they were or whence they came. Look at the names here. 2 bearers of great rings of power and a former bearer. If only the greatest and wisest of the elves had discovered this, then we are talking of them being a rumour among other elves. Wizards are then not seen as embodied Maiar, but some sort of legend or story, emissaries of some unknown in a far-off place. There's no indication that even the greatest of hobbits, such as Bilbo, understood the nature of a Maia or the nature of the Istari. To me, the hobbits of the story are aware that Gandalf is a wizard and can perform magic. He is special, somehow, but they can't articulate what makes him special. He is simply a wizard. Bilbo adventured with him, one who was already an old man in appearance. When Bilbo didn't age a day after returning with the One Ring, Gandalf would have shown up at his door looking much the same as he did the day they finished their adventure decades before. How much older can an old man look? Especially to a hobbit who looks the same as he did 60 years before. Would Bilbo have thought on this at all? Would he have asked? Would Gandalf have been forthcoming with any details even if he were asked? Despite all the dealings between these old friends being genuine, this figure in Middle-earth was not Lorien, but Gandalf. A true friend, but only a select few would ever understand his nature. By the latter stages of The Lord of the Rings, some of our hobbits who wandered out of the Shire into an adventure larger than they could have imagined are now far more aware of the fact that Gandalf is different, somehow. They can't put it into words, and obviously know nothing of the Maiar or messengers from the uttermost west, but they are at least open to the idea that he isn't just an old man who creates grand fireworks and has a bit of a temper sometimes, almost wondering why they had never considered it before. They are challenging their own thoughts on what being a wizard truly means, opening their eyes and minds to the outside world. For one thing, all 4 hobbits witnessed the power of Gandalf revealed to the demonic Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a force of light refusing to be enveloped by darkness, speaking with authority about the secret fire and the flame of Anor, while holding aloft staff and sword. Sadly, they all witnessed his descent into the abyss with the Balrog. 2 then witnessed him return, no longer hunched over in grey robes and a blue hat, but cloaked in white robes of purity, proud and even more authoritative. Would Merry and Pippin brush this off as something expected or normal, even on this once-in-a-lifetime adventure where they have witnessed black riders, a terror of flame and shadow, and talking trees? Gandalf's return is the most obvious sign that he is something greater. I think this passage from Chapter 1 of The Return of the King, Minas Tirith, is worth quoting in full.
Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did. More kingly, beautiful and powerful, and older. Yet by a sense older than sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power, and the deeper wisdom, and a majesty that was veiled. He was older. Far older. How much older? He wondered. And then he thought how odd it was that he had never thought about it before. Treebeard had said something about wizards, but even then he had not thought of Gandalf as one of them. What was Gandalf? In what far time and place did he come into the world, and when would he leave it? And then his musings broke off, and he saw that Denethor and Gandalf still looked at each other in the eye, as if reading the other's mind. But it was Denethor who first withdrew his gaze.
Absolutely one of my favourite passages. A glimpse into the mind of a hobbit when standing before 2 titans. This is really the first time Pippin truly considers what Gandalf is, sensing, quite correctly, that Gandalf holds greater power, wisdom, and majesty than the already great king in all but name, Denethor of Gondor. He senses that Gandalf's great majesty is somehow veiled. The thought of Gandalf's age comes to mind, with Pippin remarking that he didn't even think of Gandalf as one of the wizards mentioned by Treebeard passing over the Great Sea, showing that obvious signs can seem less obvious if you aren't looking for answers to questions never asked. This is really when Pippin starts to wonder about Gandalf, his eyes open to the possibility that he is not some old man with an eye for adventure alongside hobbits. He's not just one of the big folk. But despite this great insight into the mind of Pippin, it is within Frodo where I sense the greatest development, his embiggened spirit being displayed to us in moments of great wisdom and perception, the greatest the Shire has to offer. Once naive to why a Dark Lord like Sauron would want to punish simple and innocent hobbits, suddenly giving a wizard like Saruman pause.
"No, Sam!" said Frodo. "Do not kill him even now, for he has not hurt me. And in any case, I do not wish him to be slain in this evil mood. He was great once, of a noble kind that we should not dare to raise our hands against. He has fallen, and his cure is beyond us. But I would still spare him, in the hope that he may find it."
I find this to be remarkable, a completely believable and extraordinary development of the character we have followed from Chapter 1, a comment that causes Saruman to sit up and take notice of Frodo. The Hobbit describing Saruman as a being of noble kind, one that they dare not raise a hand against, treating the fallen wizard with greater respect than the hobbits of the Shire ever received from Saruman. He knows that it is not his place, or the place of the hobbits Saruman has wronged, to punish or judge Saruman. I'm reminded of the Silmarillion, when Morgoth's greatest servant Sauron sought a pardon from the herald of the King of Arda, Eonwe, representative of Manwë himself, of the Rings of Power and the Third Age telling us that Sauron was commanded to return to Aman to receive the judgment of the Valar, Eonwe acknowledging that he had not the authority to judge Sauron, to pardon those of his own order. Now, in the Shire of all places, a hobbit understands that the cure for Saruman is beyond any hobbit to provide, yet he still hopes Saruman can find it, after such destruction and evil caused by the wizard. Is Frodo referring to Saruman as a Maya? It doesn't really matter, as even if he still sees Saruman as just a wizard, he understands completely that they are far greater, ancient, and more important than simple conjurers or magicians. He knows they have a position of authority and power in the world, with Saruman once holding a position of great dignity which he squandered. The experience of Frodo giving him a keen insight, a profound understanding of matters outside his homeland, his experiences leading the larger and terrifying outside world back to his very doorstep, to be shared with the rest of his people, the innocent hobbits no longer being so innocent. Frodo's words to Saruman are a far cry from that naive hobbit sitting at the Council of Elrond, awestruck and confused at the idea of Elrond being present when the last alliance of elves and men were gathered to combat Sauron at the end of the Second Age. Frodo isn't so much astonished that Elrond is old, but astonished that he remembers such a far-off event. A tale that would be sung as some sort of legend or myth, being witnessed first-hand by this figure in front of him. If only he knew just how far back Gandalf goes. But the Frodo who journeyed to Mordor and back would not be so astonished at Elrond's words, as his own experiences changed him, a growth in knowledge and wisdom. With the fact that elves did not really age so much, mostly, after a certain point, an old man like Gandalf not aging in decades may not have been a shock to your typical hobbit, especially those who witnessed the miraculous preservation of Bilbo celebrating his 11th birthday. Their knowledge of how outsiders should be was limited. They were carefree enough, or naive enough, to never actually ask Gandalf, just how old are you? The hobbits returning from a life-changing quest would think of such questions, but would have the wisdom not to ask. Thanks for listening to episode 6. I think a lot of people aren't really interested in discussions related to hobbits. Why talk about them when we can talk about battles, dark lords and dragons? But I think hobbits get to the heart of the Lord of the Rings, ever present from the first chapter to the last. We see them changing over the course of the tale, from sneaking out of the Shire to charging into battle against insurmountable odds, side by side with kings and heroes, becoming heroes themselves. They can't be ignored when we speak of hope, fellowship, and playing a part in the bigger tale, no matter where you started. I also like to show that despite my obsession with Dark Lords and Kings, I find the journey of the 4 hobbits in The Lord of the Rings to be fascinating and important. This will not be the last episode dedicated to hobbits. I hope you enjoyed this content, and it would be great if you followed on your stream platform of choice, or maybe you want to subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Links to Patreon and everything else will be available to you. I also want to give a shout out to some special supporters over on Patreon. Grant or Alatar, who decided to shift his monthly membership to a yearly one. Sauron himself, who decided to upgrade from the Maiar tier to become the Vala Mandos. Longtime supporter Wavesailor also making the same upgrade to become Ulmo, Lord of Waters. And finally, the mightiest of the Ainur, Melkor, sometimes known as Oliver, who decided to pledge a yearly membership. Thanks to all of you and everyone else on Patreon who continues to support. And that is the end of this chapter of the Red Book.